Hello, my name is Kylie Hughes. I'm a freshman at UNCC, and I did my project on the Life and Debt film by Stephanie Black. Um, this film is based in the country of Jamaica, and it basically goes through the global economics and how it affects smaller countries, or some label them as developing countries, and in this case, it was Jamaica. So basically, just for some context, this is a really great video that I found that basically just goes through the IMF loaning process, which is what Jamaica went through originally. So, for some context, they had to kind of figure out their economic system in 1963 after they gained independence from Great Britain in 1962, and they were really struggling with their economy. And the leader at the time, they do an interview with him throughout the film, was like, I had no other choice. I had to help my people and somehow, and this was the way to do it. So he decided to make an agreement with IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And even though this is mainly about the IMF, there are other, global organizations that do the same type of thing, a couple being the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank. But the IMF is basically more known for their assistance in the loaning process. So Jamaica went through this process with the IMF in 1963. And one thing that I didn't really know, like in some of my classes, I go through learning about what these organizations are, but I never really go through the process of which they do what they do. So that was another really interesting thing to learn about. So the IMF basically, you get these loans, but they come at a cost. And this conditionality is really great to this video explains it really well. But this conditionality is basically they give you a lump sum with extremely high interest rates, and a couple regulations, not a couple, a lot of regulations that you have to abide by in order to get this loan. So basically, the conditions for Jamaica at the time was they had to basically inflate their currency to a 1 to 30 rate. I believe at the time it was only 1 to 20, but now it has risen to 1 to 30, which is crazy to think about because if you think about, the US and Great Britain, it's like a 1 to 1.3. So that just shows how great this inflation is. And they also had regulations on which programs they could now fund. And the IMF, I guess, doesn't really care about anything but industry at the time, or I guess now too, but they weren't allowed to give funds to programs like health or education, which in my mind are the two most vital, but more they focused on industry to try and raise the economy, which I do understand. So, in order to do this, they told them that they needed to focus more on imports and not exports. And this didn't make much sense to me at first, but then I kind of realized why that was the case. And um, I think throughout the film, they kind of go through each industry, each major industry in that case. I think the three most major are textiles, which I'll go over later, bananas, and potatoes. Potatoes and bananas are two of Jamaica's most harvested crops. And at the time, bringing in all of these imported produce products, it helped in the necessary sense that they needed to feed their people and it was cheaper that way. And this also kind of took me a second to understand, but it's cheaper because all of these Jamaican industries needed to get funded somehow. And overseas, from places like Idaho where they get their potatoes from, it was cheaper to buy and to ship than it was to buy from local Jamaican industries, which I thought was interesting. But the numbers make sense. So at this point in time, they were importing way more than they were exporting. And then later on in the film, they go through the industry of bananas and um, how these chemicals were then kind of in the 80s and 90s. All these produce products started to get all these chemicals and to make everything look prettier and to be bigger, and everything changed a little bit. So Jamaica's, I guess, integrity was not tarnished by this. They did not first have the money to buy all these chemicals, and two, didn't want to ruin their industry's, main purpose, which was to feed people and feed people well. So they did not participate in, making these bananas yellower or making them bigger or whatever it was. So these countries who would usually accept their imports no longer did. So that also hurt their economy a little bit. Basically, going through this Harvard article is really great, just an overall contextualization of the IMF, because obviously Jamaica isn't the first country that this has happened to. The IMF gives loans to everyone, basically, a lot of people, especially developing countries. And for global significance, I kind of go through the idea of developing countries and how these major powers like the United States and Great Britain can profit off of the label developing country, because at one point their economy is such in shambles that they would do anything, which means cheap labor. And when someone sees a country in distress, specifically when the IMF sees a country in distress, they don't really think of the people, they think of the profit. And I kind of understood that going through this. So like I said before, Jamaica once went from a self-sustaining, mostly self-sustaining nation with very few imports to a contractual agreement with the IMF where they had to, import for contractual reasons, I guess. But that was really interesting to me. And then they went into the textile industry, which I thought was super awesome, because it's not something that you really see close up too often. And I thought the textiles were something that was super, super weird, I guess you could say, because there was this area in Kingston off of the coast of Jamaica that is called the Free Zone. And the Free Zone is basically a import drop, where they take all these major shipping containers and they drop them at the port. And they built a factory on that port, basically, and at the time it was Haynes who owned that factory, and they had no federal taxes, and they didn't have to pay the country for literally anything because it was not on their land. So they rented out this port and had Jamaican people working there because they needed the money. They claimed that they were helping with unemployment because they were giving the people of Jamaica jobs. But at the same time, with no government regulations, they could also pay them whenever they wanted. So they go through a couple of people who actually worked there, because it is a documentary style film, and a couple of the women who were working in these factories said that they would make, in American money, $30 a week, which I thought was crazy to think about. They did the math for us, obviously, because Jamaican influx probably wouldn't mean too much to us, but in American money, it would be $30 a week. And, they could go on strike, but they would have no government help at all because it wasn't government regulated. So I thought that was another really interesting thing to talk about. In addition, through the cinematic response here, the director did something, Stephanie Black did something super awesome, which I think gets her point across so eloquently without actually saying the words. She was very blunt, but not to the point where she had to point it out herself. So what she did was create two separate storylines. It was a two-storyline film, and they would reference back to one another throughout the film. And one was the tourist side of Jamaica, which, when I think of Jamaica, the first thing that pops into my head is, bright sun and tropical tropical resorts and paradise and, you know, everything like that. So they go through a honeymooners, basically a week vacation in Jamaica, um, inside their little resort. They never have to leave if they don't want to. Um, and they don't have to worry about, you know, the family down the street not knowing what their kids are going to eat that night, or worrying about the farmers who aren't able to self-sustain anymore because their industries are being taken over. They don't have to worry about all that because they're on vacation. And I thought it was really something interesting when they would go from a scene of someone, you know, enjoying their vacation, laying on the beach in their bikinis and, you know, drinking margaritas and whatever it is, to the actuality of being a native in Jamaica, which is their economy is in shambles, and, you know, poverty is higher than ever, unemployment is higher than ever, homelessness is higher than ever, and then you circle back to this one little bubble of people just not having to worry about any of that. So I thought the director did a really good job about that. And finally, just my viewer response. This tweet is everything I think. Obviously, this movie or this film isn't really about African nations, but if we just sub that with Jamaica, it's basically exactly what I thought about it. Um, Basically, what I came to the conclusion as is the IMF and these global IGOs basically don't really have much interest in getting a nation back on their feet when they need it. I do really think that it's a profitable um, way to exploit these countries, and it's been proven so. Um, a lot. I really think that this article and also this video here really explain it very well. And the video itself doesn't really have too much opinion. You can kind of make that for yourself. But um, going through the 40 years that this film went through, I was able to make that conclusion for myself, and I encourage you guys to um, watch the film. It was really enlightening, especially since I kind of enjoy the economic side of things. You can kind of dig yourself into a hole and never come out because there's so many levels to it. Um, but basically, that was it. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed. And thank you for your help this semester, Professor. I really appreciate it. And talk to you later. Thank you.